Signs and Symbols, Vladimir Nabokov. For the fourth time in as many years, they were confronted with the problem of what birthday present to bring a young man who was incurably deranged in his mind. He had no desires. Man-made objects were to him either hives of evil, vibrant with the malignant activity that he alone could perceive, or gross comforts for which no use could be found in his abstract world. After eliminating a number of articles that might offend him or frighten him, anything in the gadget line, for instance, was taboo. His parents chose a dainty and innocent trifle, a basket with 10 different fruit jellies in 10 little jars. At the time of his birth, they had been married already for a long time. A score of years has elapsed, and now they were quite old. Her drab grey hair was done anyhow. She wore cheap black dresses, unlike other women of her age, such as Mrs. Sol, their next-door neighbour, whose face was all pink and mauve with paint, and whose hat was a cluster of brookside flowers. She presented a naked white countenance to the fault, finding light of spring days. Her husband, who was in the old country, had been a fairly successful businessman, was now wholly dependent on his brother Isaac, a real American of almost 40 years standing. They seldom saw him, and had nicknamed him the Prince. That Friday, everything went wrong. The underground train lost its life current between two stations, and for a quarter of an hour one could hear nothing but the dutiful beating of one's heart and the rustling of newspapers. The bus they had to take next kept them waiting for ages, and when it did come, it was crammed with garrulous high school children. It was raining hard as they walked up the brown path leading to the sanitarium. There they waited again, and instead of their little boy shuffling into the room as he usually did, his poor face blotched with acne, ill-shaven, sullen, and confused, a nurse they knew and did not care for, appeared at last and brightly explained that he had again attempted to take his life. He was all right, she said, but a visit might disturb him. The place was so miserably understaffed, and things got mislaid or mixed up so easily, that they decided not to leave their present in the office, but to bring it to him next time they came. She waited for her husband to open his umbrella, and then took his arm. He kept clearing his throat in a special, resonant way he had when he was upset. They reached the bus stop shelter on the other side of the street, and he closed his umbrella. A few feet away, under the swaying and dripping tree, a tiny half-dead, unfledged bird was helplessly twitching in a puddle. During the long ride to the subway station, she and her husband did not exchange a word, and every time she glanced at his old hands, swollen veins, brown spotted skin, clasped and twitching upon the handle of his umbrella, she felt the mounting pressure of tears. As she looked around, trying to hook her mind onto something, it gave her a kind of soft shock, a mixture of compassion and wonder, to notice that one of the passengers, a girl with dark hair and grubby red toenails, was weeping on the shoulder of an old woman. Whom did that woman resemble? She resembled Rebecca Boriznova, whose daughter had married one of the Soloveychik in Minsk years ago. The last time he had tried to do it, his method had been, in the doctor's words, a masterpiece of inventiveness. He would have succeeded had not an envious fellow patient thought he was learning to fly, and stopped him. He went. What he really wanted to do was tear a hole in his world and escape. The system of his delusions had been the subject of an elaborate paper in a scientific monthly, but long before that she and her husband had puzzled it out for themselves. Referential mania, Herman Brink had called it. In those very rare cases, the patient imagines that everything happening around him is a veiled reference to his personality and existence. He excludes the real people from the conspiracy, because he considers himself to be so much more intelligent than other men. Phenomenal nature shadows him wherever he goes. Clouds in the staring sky transmit to one another by means of slow signs, incredibly detailed information regarding him. His inmost thoughts are discussed at nightfall in manual alphabet by darkly gesticulating trees. Pebbles or stains or sunflecks form patterns, representing in some awful way messages which he must intercept. Everything has a cipher, and of everything he is the theme. Some of the spies are detached observers, such as the glass surfaces and still balls. Others, such as coats in store windows, are prejudiced witnesses, lynchers at heart. Others gain, running water, storms. Others are hysterical to the point of insanity, have a distorted opinion of him, and grotesquely misinterpret his actions. He must be always on his guard and devote every minute and module of life to the decoding of the undulation of things. The very air he exhales is indexed and filed away. If only the interest he provokes were limited to his immediate surroundings, but alas, it is not. With distance to the rents of the wild scandal increase in volume and volubility, the silhouettes of his blood corpuscles, magnified 1,000,000 times, flit over vast plains, and still farther, great mountains of unbearable solidity and height sum up in terms of granite and groaning firs the ultimate truth of his being. When they emerged from the thunder and foul air of the subway, the last dregs of the day were mixed with the street lights. She wanted to buy some fish for supper, so she handed him the basket of jelly jars, telling him to go home. He walked up to the third landing and then remembered he had given her his keys earlier in the day. In silence, he sat down on the steps, and in silence rose when some 10 minutes later she came, heavily trudging upstairs, wanly smiling, shaking her head in depreciation of her silliness. They entered their 2-room flat, and he at once went to the mirror, straining the corners of his mouth apart by means of his thumbs, with a horrible mouse-like grimace. He removed his new, hopelessly uncomfortable dental plate and severed the long tusks of saliva connecting him to it. He read his Russian language newspaper while she laid the table. Still reading, he ate the pale victuals that needed no teeth. She knew his moods and was also silent. When he had gone to bed, she remained in the living room with her pack of soiled cards and her old albums. Across the narrow yard, where the rain tinkled in the dark against some battered ash cans, windows were blandly alight, and in one of them, a black-trousered man with his bare elbows raised could be seen lying supine to an untidy bed. She pulled the blind down and examined the photographs. As a baby, he looked more surprised than most babies. From a fold in the album, a German maid they had in Leipzig and her fat-faced fiancé fell out. Minsk, the Revolution, Leipzig, Berlin, Leipzig. A slanting house front 4 years old, in a park, moodily, shyly, with puckered forehead, looking away from an eager squirrel as he would from any other stranger. Aunt Rosa, a fussy, angular, wild-eyed old lady, who had lived in a tremulous world of bad news, bankruptcies, train accidents, cancerous growths, until the Germans put her to death, together with all the people she had worried about. Age 6. That was when he drew wonderful birds with human hands and feet, and suffered from insomnia like a grown-up man. His cousin, now a famous chess player. He again, aged about 8, already difficult to understand, afraid of the wallpaper in the passage, afraid of a certain picture in a book which merely shadowed an idyllic landscape with rocks on a hillside, and an old cartwheel hanging from the branch of a leafless tree. Age 10, the year they left Europe. The shame, the pity, the humiliating difficulties, the ugly, vicious, backward children he was with in that special school. And then came a time in his life, coinciding with a long convalescence after pneumonia, when those little phobias of his, which his parents had stubbornly regarded as the eccentricities of a prodigiously gifted child, hardened as it were into a dense tangle of logically interacting illusions, making him totally inaccessible to normal minds. This, and much more, she accepted, for after all, living did mean accepting the loss of one joy after another. Not even joys in her case. Mere possibilities of improvement. She thought of the endless waves of pain that for some reason or another she and her husband had to endure, of the invisible giants hurting her boy in some unimaginable fashion, of the incalculable amount of tenderness contained in the world, of the fate of this tenderness which is either crushed or wasted, or transformed into madness, of neglected children humming to themselves in unswept corners, of beautiful weeds that cannot hide from the farmer, and helplessly have to watch the shadow of his simian stoop leave mangled flowers in its wake as the monstrous darkness approaches. It was past midnight when from the living room she heard her husband moan, and presently he staggered in, wearing over his nightgown the old overcoat with astrakhan collar, which he much preferred to the nice blue bathrobe he had. "I can't sleep," he cried. "Why?" she asked. "Why can't you sleep? You were tired." "I can't sleep because I'm dying," he said, and lay down on the couch. "Is it your stomach? Do you want me to call Dr. Solov?" No doctors, he moaned. "To the devil with doctors. We must get him out of there quick, otherwise we'll be responsible. He repeated and hurled himself into a sitting position, both feet on the floor, thumping his forehead with his clenched fist. "All right," she said quietly. "We shall bring him home tomorrow morning." "I would like some tea," said her husband, and retired to the bathroom. Bending with difficulty, she retrieved some playing cards, and a photograph or two that had shipped from the couch to the floor. Knave of hearts, 9 of spades, ace of spades. Elsa and her bestial beau. He returned in high spirits, saying in a loud voice, "I have it all figured out. We will give him the bedroom. Each of us will spend part of the night here, near him, and the other part on this couch, by turns. the dog to see him at least twice a week. It does not matter what the prince says. He won't have much to say anyway, because it will come out cheaper. The telephone rang. It was an unusual hour for their telephone to ring. His left slipper had come off, and he groped for it with his heel and toe as he stood up in the middle of the room, and childishly, toothlessly gaped at his wife. Having more English than he did, it was she who attended to calls. "Can I speak to Charlie?" said a girl's dull little voice. "What number you want? No, this is not the right number." The receiver was gently cradled. Her hands went to her old, tired heart. He smiled a quick smile and immediately resumed his excited monologue. They would fetch him as soon as it was day. Knives would have to be kept in a locked drawer. Even at his worst, he presented no danger to other people. The telephone rang a second time. The same toneless, anxious young voice asked for Charlie. "You have the incorrect number. I will tell you what you are doing. You are turning the letter O instead of the 0. They sat down to their unexpected festive midnight tea. The birthday present stood on the table. He sipped noisily. His face was flushed. Every now and then he imparted a circular motion to his raised glass, so as to make the sugar dissolve more thoroughly. The vein on the side of his bald head, where there was a large birthmark, stood out conspicuously, and although he had shaved that morning, a silvery bristle showed on his chin. While she poured him another glass of tea, he put on his spectacles and re-examined with pleasure the luminous yellow, green, red little jars. His clumsy, moist lips spelled out their eloquent labels. Apricot, grape, peach plum, quince. He had got to the crab apple when the telephone